let's have a talk about stress and the stress threshold. All right, so on this axis here, we have got stress as it increases, and on this axis here, we've got time as it increases, okay? Now, this line here is what we're going to call our stress threshold line, okay? So basically, this means that anything below this line is what we would call tolerable or manageable stress or productive stress. All right, so it's the sort of stress that motivates us and drives us to make changes and to do the things that we want to do. Anything that goes above this line is what we then call intolerable levels of stress. All right, so stress that is no longer productive and helpful in our life, stress that tends to become really overwhelming and feeling as though we're just not coping. All right, so let's have a look at this green line to begin with. Now, what we're doing here is noticing stress rising. So let's say, for example, you wake up in the morning, you realize that you've slept through your alarm, you're running late, and you start to feel your stress levels rise, but you respond to it by maybe just having a quick shower, jumping in the car, not eating your breakfast that day maybe. So you get in the car and you're on your way to work and you start to realize, you know what, I've skipped a few steps this morning, so I'm still going to be at work on time. So your stress levels start to come down. But then you get a flat tire and your stress starts to come back up again because now it's really looking like you're not going to make that meeting. All right, so you pull over, you call the person you were going to meet with, you let them know they're totally fine with it, and your stress levels start to come back down again. All right, so each time the stress happens, if you find a way that you can mitigate or manage that stress comfortably, then your stress levels will start to drop again. All right, now let's say we jump out the car, we're getting ready to change the tyre and we realise that our jack's broken. So we can't change the tyre by ourselves. Stress, straight back up again. All right, we need another solution. So maybe we jump in a taxi and we get to work that way. Our stress levels come back down again. All right, so the important thing here is that whatever the stress is, when it's coming up, we find a way that we can comfortably deal with it and we can get going and we can get to where we really want to be. Sometimes that's quite literal. Other times it'll be things like let's say a more basic physiological example in your body. So let's say you're feeling thirsty, all right? So you realize that you've been talking for ages, you've been in meetings and you're feeling really thirsty and you can feel that drive in your body to get a drink. So probably most of us know what that's like when you hit that point of feeling really thirsty and you're dying to go and get a drink. As soon as you get that drink, you start to feel better again. So there are some really basic physiological examples of stress that drives us to do something. Stress doesn't need to be something that is big and scary and overwhelming. It can be the little things in our body that prompt us to make a change. All right, so we're talking about any type of stress, anything that prompts you to feel even slightly uncomfortable. That is normal, tolerable, productive stress. Okay, now what we want to look at next, so this is a comfortable trajectory through stress. Stress happens, but we find our way through, we come back down, and at the end of the day, we're feeling fairly relaxed again. All right, hopefully, ideally, we get right back down to this relaxed space to be able to sleep comfortably. Okay, now let's have a look at what happens. Let's see if we can go down a page. All right, it's not going to do it for me this time. Let's try it this way. There we go. Okay. Now, let's look at what happens when we don't get that chance to come back down. So let's say here we've got our stress coming up, we find a way to deal with it, stress comes back down, something else happens and our stress goes back up. We go down a bit, we're getting really close to our threshold here, but we do manage to come back down and then something else happens and it doesn't even need to be something big. Look at how little this little part of the trajectory is here, but it's still enough to take us right up to that tipping point where we feel like we're not really coping. Now, we manage to get through that and we come back down and then something else happens. All right, now, when we're around here, this is the point where even little things suddenly feel like they're too hard. All right, so, and you'll find this tends to happen on the back of one thing after another, after another, after another. Now that can happen over a long period of time, can happen over a short period of time. And this is why we don't have any numbers on this graph, because it is a very individual thing and it's also really dependent on the situation that you're going through. All right, so whatever's going on, let's say you didn't get your stress levels right back down and something else happened and that was just too much, pushed you over the edge. So when we get to this point and we've come up over our threshold, this is where it starts to feel really difficult to manage. Now for everyone that's going to play out differently, and it's going to probably play out differently at different times as well. So if you've just gotten home and you've found out that, I don't know, whatever you were planning to make for dinner is off and it's just been too much, it's too big a day, you can't cope with the idea of trying to think of something else, you don't even feel like you want to get on the phone and call someone to order some delivery, you've just had enough. So at this point, you might just decide, too bad, can't be bothered doing anything, I'm just going to sit on the couch with a glass of wine and Netflix. All right? Now, from your body's perspective, that's potentially going to add a little bit of stress. Or let's imagine you go to Netflix and your good old NBN isn't working properly. Your stress keeps coming up. So when you're up above this threshold, this is where it's starting to feel like, oh my God, everything's going wrong. I can't function anymore. I can't just reset and go and make myself a different dinner, make myself a healthy dinner, get on the phone and order something for myself. I just can't cope with this right now. Now, when we go over our stress threshold, we tend to go into one of a number of responses. So sometimes it will be a fight response, sometimes it'll be a flight response, and sometimes it'll be a freeze response. And again, that depends on a lot of different factors. But if we're using our Netflixing example, you were probably looking at going into a bit of a freeze response. Can't cope with this anymore. I just want to shut down and distract myself. All right, so that's a little bit like a freeze response. Now, if we're doing things that allow us to manage our stress, even if they're not overly healthy for us, but they are helping us bring our stress levels down, then we will come back down underneath this threshold. All right, now, ideally we want to be doing healthy things to come back down, but the whole point of what we're talking about today is that when we're up here in this intolerable stress, the unproductive stress, this is the area where we tend to not be making the healthiest choices. All right, and I'm going to talk about this in another video another time, but at this point, this is where we want to have really good solid practices in place that we automatically fall back on, because you'll notice when you get to this point, these are the habits that come out. So if your habits are to go to bed early, if your habits are to grab something healthy from the fridge, if your habits are to meditate, if your habits are to go and exercise, then you're much more likely to fall back on those even when you're going up over your stress threshold. If your habits are not in place in a healthy way, then you're going to fall back on the things that aren't necessarily good for you. All right, but at this point, you're not really making active choices about what you want to do. You're much more in reaction. So you're not tending to think through and do things the way that you really want to once you've come up over your stress threshold. All right, so just to recap quickly, we've got our green line, which is normal, healthy, productive stress, and the way that we mitigate, we come back down to that relaxed state. Compared to our blue line, where stress builds and builds and builds and builds. Now, we can look at current events in Australia and globally at the moment in relation to this blue line. So let's say we were living in a bushfire prone area in Australia over this summer, and we could feel our stress levels going up and up and up and up. So every time we had a bit of a lull in the weather, stress would come back down, and then things would come back up again, and we'd be worried about the fire danger coming back up, or very stressful time. So I won't go into an awful lot of detail because I don't want it to be triggering for anyone. But we can look at what's been going on in Australia recently through the summer as being an ongoing level of heightened stress. And for people who were in those regions, people who felt under threat, they would have been existing right up here near their threshold and possibly also going up past their threshold. Because again, you know, we're talking about managing day-to-day life in amongst all of this, trying to earn a living, trying to deal with the environment around you. So some people may have already been up here, some people might have been hovering around under here. Now, we might have felt like we were starting to come back down because the weather's been changing, the fires are under control, and then a pandemic hits. Now, some people will feel much more affected by what's going on with the recent virus than others. Some people are probably coming into it based on this green line. So they may not have been feeling under stress beforehand. They might have been feeling quite comfortable. They might have had really comfortable, healthy coping mechanisms in place in their everyday life. And so the virus coming along has had an impact, but it hasn't been enough for them to feel like they can't cope. Whereas for someone else in a very similar situation, if they've had that stress building up recently, then they're going to feel like they can't cope. And one of the reasons I wanted to put this video out today is that I'm talking to a lot of people about this right now, and a lot of people are judging how they're feeling versus how someone else might be feeling. And it's really, really important to remember that everyone's life and stress trajectory is different. And some people will have been experiencing more stress leading up to this time than others. So for some people, suddenly being isolated, suddenly not being able to do the job that they love, suddenly not being able to see friends and family in the way that they want to, will be enough to take them over the top. All right, whereas for others, it might be okay. Now, I've somehow brought this red line up, but that's okay because this is what we were going to talk about next. So the green line is normal, comfortable, easy to manage stress. All right, the blue line is the build and build and build and build until you go over your threshold. Now, the red line's another really important one, and this is one that I tend to use for people who have had trauma in their past. There can be other circumstances that create this as well, but we'll use trauma as our example tonight. Now, some people are so used to existing at a certain level of underlying stress that they don't really remember in their body how to get back down to a relaxed point. So this can tend to happen for someone who has an issue with anxiety, for example. Their scale will be right up here near their threshold. Now there's a number of reasons that this can happen. Some of it biochemical, some of it situational, so someone who's been through a trauma, someone who is in an ongoing difficult job, for example. So it's one thing to have things rise over time, but when you've been stuck there for a long time, you can start to feel as though you're up here on this red line. So the way that I tend to ask people to think about this red line is, do you remember what it's like to feel completely relaxed? Do you feel like if we dealt with a little bit of the things that are causing you stress, you would be able to fairly easily come back down to this relaxed point? All right, so for some people, it's really hard to remember what it's like to be down here where it's relaxed. For some people, it's really hard to remember, yeah, I have stress, but then I deal with it and I come back down. All right, so even for the people on the blue line, which is, yeah, I've been going through this really long patch of stress and now I feel like I'm not coping, but I know I'll be okay and I know I'll be able to come back down. For people on this red line, it's just, I don't know how to cope with this anymore. I can't remember the last time I felt relaxed. I don't even know how to wind down anymore. I don't know how to relax myself. I don't know what to do to help myself feel better. All right, and this is when our bodies tend to need a bit of a reset. All right, our bodies need a bit more support to be able to bring us back down to a comfortable, tolerable level of stress. All right, so if you're feeling like you're on the red line, I'd really encourage you to get some support and some professional help so that you are able to collect some tools to start to bring yourself down, and also look at the reasons why you feel like you're on this path. Okay, so all right, so let's do a really quick recap. So our stress levels will rise from time to time. Everybody has a stress threshold, and that is different for everyone, hence the no numbers on this diagram. Okay, most of the time what we want is to have a comfortable, healthy level of stress and motivation in our lives so that we can make the changes that we want to make, so we feel motivated to do what we want to do. And those stress levels will be tolerable and manageable and productive. All right, so that's our green line. Our blue line happens when we've had stress build and build and build and build, and then all of a sudden we feel like we've gone over the top of our stress threshold and we don't know how to cope anymore. But for the most part, that's fairly situational. Might be a number of things that have built up. For the most part though, we know that we need to come back down. We remember what it's like and we just need to do a bit of work to bring our bodies and our cells back down under this line. The red line is a little bit different. This is where we feel like we're really stuck up on this level of stress that is just really unmanageable and really intolerable and unproductive in our lives. And at this point, this is where you really want to consider getting someone outside of yourself to help you. Sometimes having someone help you see your situation in a different way can be incredibly helpful, because this is the whole, often the being too close to the trees. What's that? Can't see the forest for the trees. You know what I mean? All right, so hopefully this little diagram has given you a little bit of an idea today as to what the various levels of stress feel like and why you may be finding it more stressful or less stressful during the current situation with the virus than someone nearby you might be. All right, so one of the main reasons I wanted to talk about this today is I think we all need to understand that whatever level of stress or anxiety we are or are not feeling right now is okay. It's us and how we are responding. The trick is to look at what is tolerable and comfortable and productive for you. All right? If it's not tolerable and comfortable and productive, that's where you need to be getting some help, or at least taking some active steps to bring yourself back down to that relaxed state so that you can comfortably cope and thrive regardless of what's going on around you. All right. Thank you very much.